He threw open the gate with one sentence and turned my life around. But let me back up a sec, because before that moment, I was a mother on a sidewalk in a storm, holding a shivering 8-year-old and pretending the rain wasn't needling our faces like broken glass. And before any miracle, the last thing I heard inside that mansion was a cake hitting tile and my mother-in-law saying, "Get out of my house." Yeah, that happened. And if you've ever stood there swallowing your pride because you're out of options, you know exactly how a human being can feel smaller than a wet match. The kitchen had smelled like vanilla and old smoke-a-me little candle for David. A year to the day since he was gone when Monica swept in. He was like a metronome for disapproval, eyes skimming the counters like I'd left fingerprints on a reputation. "Who told you could put that here?" she said, and when I whispered I just wanted to remember him, Mother, she didn't even look at me. She just flicked her wrist and sent the cake face down to the tile, frosting smeared like a bruise, candle rolling, wax bleeding into crumbs. Grace coughed from the corner of me. Kid always tries to be quiet about being sick, and I went to her, patting her back, telling Monica, please, she's not well, just tonight. The store. Monica cut me off with a laugh that had more knives than humor and said, "Pack your things, be out before dark." So we were, the door slamming on our backs, the wind taking the rest. We tried a motel, but the woman with the bottle blonde hair took one look at my backpack, at Grace's pale face, and said, "We don't take street people," like the words themselves were a disinfectant. And the door clicked, and the rain got louder. I pressed the doorbell at the apartment of a college friend I hadn't seen in years, saw the curtain move and a shadow hesitate, and then nothing, the light going out like second thoughts do. At a clinic, a security guard stood in a doorway of bright fluorescent warm and said, "No papers, no entry," and behind him empty chairs yawned like mouths that could have swallowed us whole and still had room. We made it to a park with benches soaked through and a tree big enough to pretend it was shelter. I took off my coat and spread it on the cement and told Grace it was a game. "Hush now. We just have to be quiet. We just have to be brave." And that's when she whispered into my shoulder, "Mom, would it be easier for you if I disappeared?" And I swear to you, the sky pressed down so hard my ribs creak, because there's no mercy in the world like a child asking permission to make your life lighter. You know what I mean? Near dawn, the rain became a steady drip and the cold turned mean. We found an old storage shed behind a big house, fresh gravel, ironwork on the gate, a camera eye that winked red in. Inside the shed, there were burlap sacks and rusted rakes, and, God help me, a trash bin with a blanket at the bottom that smelled like mold and indignity. I shook it out, laid it on the floor, told Grace it was soft as cloud, and she smiled like kids do at small mercies and burrowed in, and I turned away before she could see my face. When morning smudged the walls with light, my throat was raw from not crying. We had no money left, no place to go, only a door with an intercom and the stubborn little pride a mother keeps even when everything else has been pawned to survive. I pressed the button. "I'm not asking for money," I said when the speaker popped and hissed. "I'll work Kyle, scrub floors, pull weeds, anything for a bowl of soup for my daughter." Silence. 10 seconds, a lifetime. I started to turn away when I heard the lock clack, and the gate slid open, and there he was, tall, an umbrella like a black sail, a face so still it felt like standing in front of a lake with no wind. He looked at me, then at Grace, and he didn't say, "Who are you?" or "Why are you here?" He just stepped back and let the gate open wider. Inside was marble and echo and a kind of cold that doesn't come from the thermostat. He pointed to the kitchen sink piled with dishes to a towel and said, "Start here," and left. That was all. I washed plates in water, so cold my hands went numb, wiped counters until they squeaked, and when I stopped to breathe, I found Grace sitting on the floor with her teddy, wide-eyed and watchful. The man came back, watched us for a long, unreadable moment, then disappeared again. Later, when I finished, there was a tray by the door of the little room he'd shown us milk, a cookie, a banana, and it wasn't a promise, and it wasn't pity, it was an action, and sometimes it's the only language you can trust. His name was Nicholas Coldwell, and the house carried his silence the way old trees carry lightning scars. Days passed, and the mansion changed by inches, the whisper of a broom in the morning, steam lifting from soup, Grace's small laugh bouncing off wood panels that had only known footsteps for years. Nicholas watched without watching. I mended a frayed elbow on one of his shirts by the kitchen window, and he paused in the doorway like the sound of a needle sliding through cloth meant something he couldn't name. Grace taped a crayon drawing to the fridge 3 stick figures under a giant rain cloud and wrote, in careful crooked letters, "You and me and Mom." And when Nicholas saw it, his hand hovered like he wanted to touch it, but was afraid it might vanish if he pressed too hard. The twist, the one I didn't see coming because whoever does came from my past and his. A headline pinged my old phone to life. And suddenly there were photos of me and Grace at the gates and captions that read like a character assassination written by a relative who knew exactly where to stick the knife. Lisa, my former sister-in-law, had found an audience, and Monica, who'd kicked us out, had found her silence again. Outside the Coldwell gates, cameras multiplied like mushrooms after rain. Inside, Nicholas's phone kept chiming, stock numbers wobbling, voices on speaker saying this can't drag on. And when I overheard him say the same words to his lawyer, my lungs closed. You know the feeling, because pride is heavy and shame is heavier, and both together will break your back. So I packed a small bag. I wrote a note. Thank you for the safe days. We took nothing but our gratitude. I set it under a stone on the nightstand, and I left at dawn, Grace asleep against my shoulder, the world just gray enough to look forgiving. We made it to an awning in front of a laundromat, the kind of place where the light is more hum than glow, and I sat down with her tucked into me, and I told myself this is what mothers down move. We endure until the worst passes. What I didn't know, and only learned later, is that the note cut him open. Nicholas stood in the small room the way people stand at graves when they know the only thing left to say is goodbye, and the drawing on the fridge looked a lot like a promise he had already failed once. He had a daughter, one Slillian. On a sunny afternoon, he'd told her he'd be home soon, and he didn't make it in time, and a car on a road took everything that mattered and left him with marble and echo. That's why his voice had sounded like Grace's teddy bear, sad, but trying not to cry. Let me back up a sec and say this. The person you think is a statue is usually just doing their best not to shatter. He found us that night, which is the kind of sentence you think only happens in movies until it's you beneath an awning blinking up at a man with rain running off his hair, holding out a coat. I'm not coming back, I told him, because humiliation makes you defensive and kindness makes you suspicious. I won't be the reason your life catches fire. He knelt in the puddles, didn't care what it did to his suit, and said, "It's not that I gave you a home, it's that there isn't one without you." His voice shook on the last word like a bridge under a truck, and Grace stirred and peered at him and said, "Are you still sad like my bear?" And Nicholas smiled with something soft around the edges and said, "Not anymore." Back at the house, life warmed up like a room after someone opens the oven. The mansion started to smell like burnt cookies in the morning and roses on the table at night. Me hand in the garden, his awkward recipes, Grace's crayons leaving fingerprints of joy in every corner. Then Dorian, Nicholas's attorney, the kind of man who wears his suits like armor, showed up with a calm smile and a folder. The smear campaign, exposed down to IP addresses and timestamps. Retractions published, apologies forced, contracts pulling away from the Parkers like tide from a sandcastle. It wasn't revenge so much as repair, and it mattered because the names people call you in public will try to seep under your skin in private. And then the unexpected Monica's voice on the phone, brittle but cracking, asking for a meeting she didn't deserve. She said she was sorry. She said she wanted to see her granddaughter. Maybe the old Monica was still in there drawing lines around her pride and calling them principles. But a different woman spoke that day, one who'd seen a photograph of a child in a storm and couldn't swallow it. I stood in the garden with clippers in hand while Dorian relayed the message and the offer of support. I looked across the yard at Nicholas crouched in the grass, untangling a kite string while Grace instructed him with the seriousness of a small general. And I told Dorian no. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. Grace doesn't need their money, I said. She needs safety. You can forgive someone without letting them back into the house they burned. Nicholas took me to an old oak near the edge of a lawn, where the ground keeps secrets and the light settles like dust. He planted a lilac, there Lily's favorite hands in the dirt, like penance, like prayer. "I can't replace her," he said, and I put my hand over his, and I didn't say the obvious thing because he already knew it. I just stood with him and listened to the leaves. Inside, Grace taped up a new drawing no rain this time. Just three figures holding hands under a sky, so blue you could fall into it, and she wrote a word she'd asked me to spell twice, and then decided to sound out herself. Family. Nicholas saw it and looked at me like a room with all the lights in it had just flipped on. "We can call this place home," he said, "if you agree." I didn't answer with words. I pressed a kiss into Grace's hair and squeezed his hand and felt the house breathe. There's a satisfying ending if you want to find one. Apologies published, doors opening, a mansion that learned how to hold laughter again, and there's an open question too, because life refuses to tie its own bow. If Monica stands at the gate one day with the storm behind her and an apology in her pocket, do I open the door? Do I make her tea? Do I hand her the photograph where Grace's smile makes her chest ache? Or do I keep the boundary that love taught me to draw? Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's a quiet decision in a garden by a lilac bush. Sometimes it's a child who finally sleeps without flinching at footsteps in the hall. You know what I mean? So that's our story off a night when a door closed and a gate opened, of a man who thought he'd buried his heart next to a memory, and a woman who thought pride meant leaving before she became a burden, of a child who said the saddest sentence I've ever heard, and then laughed later at a kite that finally caught the wind. If you were me, what would you do about the past, knocking accept the apology, or keep the distance? Where do you draw your lines between right and wrong, between payback and peace, between blood and the family you choose? Tell me below what justice looks like to you, and whether you think I should let that gate swing again or leave it where it is.